Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello, welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. John Keir, your host here. As always, joining me today is Austin Davidson.
Hello.
He is my good old co-host, and we're going to be talking about the NFL draft and recapping the Pittsburgh Steelers picks. Just a few days ago, 7 different picks in the books, Season 3, Episode 19. We're going to talk a little bit about those picks, a little bit about the NFL draft, and a little bit about kind of the outlook for the new rookies that have joined the Steelers roster. So I guess the first bit of news to get to is that, not too surprisingly, given the fact the Steelers drafted 2 safeties in the draft, the Steelers have parted ways with J.J. Wilcox, terminating his $3.125 million contract, and he is now a free agent. So pretty standard stuff here. I would have been shocked that the Steelers didn't do this anyways, even if they had drafted only 1 safety in the first place.
I have to agree with you there. I have to mirror your point. I think that J.J. Wilcox was just a big cap hit for a guy that wasn't going to get any playing time this season, so I think it was a good move.
The story of J.J. Wilcox, what will it be, Austin? A guy that was flipped for, a 6th-round pick? The Steelers thought he might have been able to add something on defense, and to his credit, he did have an interception, and he did play a little bit early on in the year, but he really faded down the stretch and eventually became an inactive at the end of the season.
Yep, just didn't work out. Just couldn't make it on special teams, was a liability actually, getting a few flags, and just that was it. It was cost a lot of money for the Steelers to have as a backup. So, good riddance, I suppose.
Alrighty, let's move into the draft. It is over, and we've had time to talk about all 3 days. You did the day 3 recap. Now that we've had a little time to let things marinate, let's talk a little bit about each pick, and let's go, pick by pick. We'll talk about, do you like it? Do you not like it? What can you expect from this player next year or in the future? And I guess just give the overall pick a grade. So let's start with round 1, 28th overall. The Steelers take safety Terrell Edmunds from Virginia Tech. I know we talked a little bit about this before. We weren't huge fans of this. Has your opinion changed at all? Do you like this pick at all? Do you still not like it? How are you feeling about Terrell Edmunds?
My idea has not changed about Edmunds, and it's not really Edmunds' fault. I don't like the pick. There's some things about Edmunds I don't like his deep coverage skills, but he does have some good things to him, like all his athletic ability. However, I thought his abilities were good for the 4th round. Not 2nd, not 3rd, the 4th. He was projected to go in the 3rd, and when I did my analysis on him, I said I would like him a lot better if he went in the 4th. That's why he was my 4th-ranked safety out of all the safeties I looked at, and he was one of the 2 that I really didn't like so much. So I was hoping he would fall to the 4th round. So instead, Steelers took him in the 1st, obviously. So let me go on a mini rant here away from Edmunds for a second. I am genuinely mad at the Steelers brass. They aren't aggressive whatsoever. They just passively let things happen. I don't mind that they didn't trade up for Rashaan Evans. It probably would have cost them big to do so, moving up in the 1st round, but they probably should have tried a little harder to trade up. But what really bothers me is once they realized they couldn't trade up, they should have traded down. There's no question in my mind. They wanted Terrell Edmunds. That's who they said wanted their pick to be. That's who they were hoping was going to be there. And I will forever believe that Edmunds would have been there 10 picks later or even 15 picks later. You cannot convince me this guy with his skill set that he can't cover deep at all, which is the safety's biggest thing. You want a safety who could cover deep and kind of come down and make stops if you want a really great safety. And he doesn't have half of that. So he's already really bad, or not well set off, is what I'm trying to say. And so I believe he would have been there 10 or 15 picks back. And the Steelers should have been more like the Patriots, who aggressively traded back in this draft. They got so many picks, including some for next year. The Steelers just chose to stand by and accept fate, and this is why the Patriots are better than them. The Patriots both prepared for the future and now in their draft. And the Steelers really only prepared for the future, wasting a lot of their picks on guys that will not play yet. It's just aggravating, and that's why I hate this pick so much. If the Steelers really wanted Edmonds this early, they should have traded back and gotten like a third-round pick out of it. I know they could have, because looking at another trade that happened that night, the Eagles traded with the Baltimore Ravens. They traded back. The Ravens gave up their second, a third, and a second in the 2019 draft, and that was for the last pick in the draft. And I'm not saying the Steelers should have traded with the Ravens. I'm just saying they should have traded with someone. And it's just the Steelers' pick was a pick 28. It wasn't even the last pick in the draft. It was close to it, but I know that they could have moved back with someone and gotten a deal similar to that, if not better. It's just it really pissed me off because they were convinced, their brass convinced, he would have not been there in the second round. And to that I said, there's no way. I could imagine he might not be there for the Steelers' second pick. That would be a reach too. But I think Terrell Edmonds would have been there for the second pick, but there's no way he was gone before the first 16 picks in the second round. I can't imagine. I wouldn't have fathomed it. But I guess that's just, you just have to imagine what would happen because we don't know what would have happened if Terrell Edmonds was not selected. But for the pick overall, I give Edmonds a C-. It was a hell of a reach, but it was just a position that needed addressing. So that keeps it from being totally bad. As for his potential next year, I see him coming in when the Steelers are versing a team with a big safety, so he could come in and help because that's one of the Steelers' problems in the past. The small one that doesn't happen very often, but they have struggled against really good tight ends in the past, specifically Rob Gronkowski. I think that's why Edmonds was brought in the first place. I think that's why they reached so hard, though. I talked about them not being better than the Patriots, but I think this pick was just to counter the Patriots as best as they could. A little late, but because Rob Gronkowski is thinking of retiring soon. So, but I mean, it's a pick nonetheless. Other than that, he's really just. I can't imagine him playing that much. This safety room is pretty full, and unless Sean Davis is really like doing really bad in this season, I can only see him getting at most 40% of the snaps, and that's a little bit. That's reaching. So, what do you think about this pick? Give me all your analysis on it.
Alrighty, I don't have as much to say as you do. I have looked at his tape a little bit since the draft. But before I talk about him, let me just say that the Steelers did say, we listened to the interview with Kevin Colbert on the Mark Madden show. The Steelers wanted to trade up and pick Rashaan Evans. So obviously that's something the Steelers had in mind. They wanted the inside linebacker. But I think the Steelers should have traded up to get him, and I know it would have been a steep price, but I think it would have been worth it, and I think the Steelers really should have tried to do it. I'm a little wishy-washy on this pick. Now, I'll break it up into the good and the bad. So as far as the good goes, they addressed the safety position, and that's a position that they desperately needed help at. They got an athletic guy who has a lot of potential. He can play in the box, or he can play a little bit in coverage right now. He's not great at it, but he can do both. That's what he did at Virginia Tech. And again, with the bad, he's not great at both. He's specifically not great at coverage deep, so he can help more in the box right now. He shows promise, but that's not going to help right now. Beyond that is the fact that, again, Edmonds was graded as a third-round player. Sometimes you see guys rise late in the draft like Edmonds did, but the consensus around the league seems to be that Edmonds was going to be available for at least the early part of the second round. So the Steelers, like Austin was talking about, should have traded down at least 5 to 10 picks and would have should have tried to take him there. I don't hate taking Edmonds as much because I don't think he'll be a good player, but I think the Steelers could have taken him later in the draft like Austin was saying, and I don't know how big of an impact he's going to make this year. I'm torn on this because, again, it was a position of need, and we're still trying to... It seems as though the Steelers are replacing Ryan Shazier with several different athletic players that are kind of safeties but can also play in the box. That seems to be where they're going with guys like Edmonds and Marcus Allen, who we'll get to later. But at the same time, I just can't justify this selection given where it was, I should say. It's not a horrible pick. It's not the worst pick in the draft, but it's one of the bigger reaches in the first round, and that brings down this grade a lot. So I'm going to give it a C+. The good being that the Steelers drafted for need here. The bad part is that they could have gotten him later. So with that, let's move on to the second round pick. Wide receiver James Washington, the wide receiver from Oklahoma State. He's only 5'11", but he's known as a deep threat. What do you think about him?
This is my favorite pick of the draft for the Steelers. After the Steelers reached in the first round, I was ecstatic that Washington actually fell in the second because he was projected to go early in the second. And I was super glad that the Redskins took Geis right before the Steelers had the chance because I'm pretty sure if Geis was there, the Steelers were taking Geis. And as you said, Washington is a deep threat, a guy that can replace Martavis Bryant as he's a fast receiver who can make a contested catch. He doesn't have the height Martavis Bryant has, as you said, but I think us Steelers fans know that height isn't everything in a receiver. Even then, as I talked about in the wide receiver pre-draft show that we did, he doesn't have many problems. He just hasn't been asked to run many complex routes in college. And he also hasn't been exposed to press coverage that much because he played in the Big 12. Big 10, I'm sorry, which he isn't guaranteed to be bad at either. We just kind of don't know. As for grade, since he may struggle in the, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. We just don't know about how he's going to perform against press coverage and if he can handle the complex routes. So for his grade, I'll give it an A. It would be an A+ if he knew he could handle the NFL. But and as for his play, he should get a lot of playing time. He's now the wide receiver 3 on this team. He should be on the field like 90% of snaps, barring injury. I feel like for a normal player, that's like a starter normally plays like 96% of the snaps or something like that. They have to come off for like being tired and stuff. So I'll say 90% being safe. He's a day one starter. He should be right in the starting lineup. And I want to apologize. I don't know what's going through my head. I was right the first time when I said Big 12. I don't know what's going on today, but that's all I have to say for James Washington. What do you have to say about the pick with James Washington?
Well, after the Steelers traded Martavis Bryant, they clearly needed a receiver. They were basically a two-man position group. So I'm a huge fan of this pick. I think they might have gotten a better all-around player in James Washington. Bryant's faster, more athletic, and he's taller, but Washington was a prolific deep ball receiver, and he was great at Oklahoma State, despite not testing very great with his speed. The Steelers are probably going to have him replace Bryant right away with as a deep receiver. But once he develops a little more and learns the rest of the route tree, I think he's going to be a very effective weapon. The Steelers brass stated that he's already shown a strong willingness to go over the middle and make the tough catches, and he came down with a lot of contested passes. I mentioned earlier, I think it was the Day 2 recap, he led the passer rating when targeting him was the best in the nation when he was coming down with a contested pass. So that's pretty good. And those aren't things that Martavis Bryant did very well either, so I'm hopeful that Washington is going to be a pretty good all-around receiver. The one concern, again, is that he doesn't have the straight-line speed to scare defenses over the top like Bryant did, so you can expect more press coverage to see, which, again, he didn't really see in the Big 12. He might not seem like the prototypical deep threat, but I think he's going to be a great fit for the Steelers' offense. And as you'll remember last year, Juju Smith-Schuster was not exactly the fastest guy in the world either. So I still think this is a pretty good pick. I'll give it an A- just because, I don't know, I feel this draft left a bad taste in my mouth, and maybe I'm a little salty, so I'm not going to give it an A exactly. Maybe it's just that I wanted a defensive player again still, but I don't get me wrong. I was very happy with this pick. So James Washington, the second-round pick, gets an A- from me. All right, this is the big, the big pick of the draft, actually. This is going to be what determines how we look at this draft class. It's quarterback Mason Rudolph, also from Oklahoma State, the potential future of the Pittsburgh Steelers. What do you think of this pick?
I just want you guys to be prepared. I wrote an essay on this topic. I think I wrote literally a page worth of writing about this one pick because there's just so much layers to it. There's so much to be mad about. There's so much everything. So let's go back to my rant I made when talking about Edmonds. You know why the Patriots are so good? They prepare for now and the future. Sure, right now they don't have a quarterback to take over behind Brady, but they can wait for that when that need actually arises. The Steelers don't understand that concept. They only understand planning for the future. And this pick, especially because it was the pick Steelers traded away Bryant for, was terrible. Again, this is on the brass, not Rudolph. How the Steelers got defensive players that I liked in the first 2 rounds, this would have been great. I would have been ecstatic that Rudolph fell if they picked a safety and inside linebacker, or inside linebacker then safety. But the Steelers traded a win-now guy, which overall was the right move to do for such a great offer, for a guy that won't see the sunlight until injury or 3 years from now. Terrible move. When the Steelers needed to improve their defense further, the Steelers just gave up on win now. What this pick and the other third-round pick told me, which we'll get to later into the next pick, is we can't contend with the Patriots. We can't make it past the Jaguars. Let's give up on win now mode and prepare for the future. And that's crap. That's just straight up crap. Both of these third-round picks were mistakes, and the Steelers should be ashamed for rolling over like this. Hey, guys, how do we fix giving up 45 points to the Jaguars at home in the playoffs? By drafting 2 guys that won't start in the offense for 4 years. But it's just despicable, especially when Malik Jefferson was on the board. He offered them a chance to actually get better on defense a little. But no. This pick also left me thinking, what if this is the move that drives Roethlisberger into retirement? He said he wanted to play 3 more years, and you go behind his back and draft a guy that's only going to be on a 4-year contract. First of all, that's not going to be a big sample size to have 1 year before deciding on whether you want to extend his contract. And then also, even if Ben doesn't play for 3 more years, what if that's only because of this move in the draft? I wouldn't be happy if Ben retired early because of the young quarterback behind him. I would be pissed if this drove him out of Pittsburgh. I want him to just have his career go as long as possible because he's doing good. Until his career is not good anymore, I don't want him out. But this pick, I might not ever be happy with Mason Rudolph starting. If Ben retires earlier than 3 years, I'm just going to think to myself, what if it's because of Mason Rudolph? What if it's because he's here? But then finally, this just pisses me off further about the wasted 4th-round pick on Josh Dobbs last year. Another stupid move by the Steelers and wasted pick, as he may just end up getting cut. It's either him or Landry Jones. And the Steelers, in their infinite wisdom, seem to love Jones, so we will see. I'm really hoping they trade Dobbs. I know John thinks there's no hope for that, but I really think a 4th-round guy from last year that is still unproven can get a 6th-round pick, and definitely a 7th. Look at some backup quarterbacks like Ryan Fitzpatrick, E.J. Manuel, Austin Davis, Matt Castle, and etc. Those teams know what they have. We know what they have. So why wouldn't they take a chance on the guy that still has potential, who is still young? I personally think he would be a perfect fit for the Seahawks, as Dobbs can move like Wilson can, if not faster at this point. But back to Rudolph, this pick gets a D-, and it only doesn't fail because it was such a value pick. I will forever say that. Mason Rudolph was taken for a steal in the 3rd round when he was projected to go in the 2nd round, and the Patriots had picks in the 2nd round. So you know what? It doesn't fail because of that. But we are forever, for the next 4 years or so, going to be talking about how horrible this pick and how this influenced the Steelers, especially if Malik Jefferson is good. If Malik Jefferson, who is now a Bengal, is good, we are going to be infinitely pissed off. We're going to be. I might not be able to speak for John, but I'm going to be infinitely pissed off that Malik Jefferson was good, and that he's in the AFC North. So that's something. But that concludes my essay on Mason Rudolph and why this pick was horrible and why the Steelers brass is beyond stupid this year. What do you think of the Mason Rudolph pick in the 3rd round?
Well, rest assured, I will have my eyes on Malik Jefferson because he was one of my favorite players in this draft. I've been back and forth on this one, and we talked about it at the end of the Day 2 recap. We would have liked this pick a lot more had at least one of the previous 2 picks been on a player on the defensive side of the ball that we didn't think was a reach. So, like Rashaan Evans or Malik Jefferson. I think we wanted to see someone that we thought could help the defense more right away. If had that been the case, I think I would have loved this pick. And let me be clear. even though Ben Roethlisberger says he wants to play 3 more years, let's remember he said he was thinking about retiring after the 2016 season. How can we, or the Steelers for that matter, take him at his word that he intends to actually play those 3 seasons? I believe the Steelers should have waited at least 1 more year, but taking a guy here that the Steelers clearly loved at the 3rd round when he was clearly a higher graded player is not the worst thing in the world, again, if the Steelers had addressed defense a little bit more beforehand. But here's the thing about Rudolph. He's not going to have to play right away. He won't have a ton of expectations out of the gate. But this pick will be a success or failure based on if he's actually Roethlisberger's successor. So, in the future, he's going to have a lot heaped on him, a lot of expectations. When you get picked this early, yes, he was a 3rd-round pick, but really he was a round 1 to 2 guy. You have to be legit. They got his top target in James Washington, too, to come with him, and he seems to have everything he's going to need to be able to succeed. If he's not the guy, this is going to be looked back upon as a terrible selection, one of the worst in recent memory, especially if the Steelers don't win another championship before Ben Roethlisberger retires. The value of the pick, in my mind, drives it up a little bit, but given the rest of the draft, I was originally thinking a B+, but I'm going to change it, it's a B-, but I'm going to change it to a C+ right now, just because the Steelers, again, continued to ignore inside linebacker, a position that Austin and I have been clamoring for over 2 years now. I mean, we've literally been talking about it almost as long as this podcast has been in existence. Are we not wrong?
No, we've literally gone 2 years without getting an inside linebacker when we basically begged on our podcast for one.
So, I don't know. And it's not just that. It's the entire draft class that Mason Rudolph and his success will hinge on. So, it's tough. It's tough because I think in a perfect world, if the Steelers had gotten Rashaan Evans and maybe if they had managed to get Terrell Edmunds in the 2nd round, and then all of a sudden you get Mason Rudolph here in the 3rd round, all of a sudden that's an A+ draft in my opinion, right?
I think so. I think that's a pretty solid draft in my eyes.
I mean, I know it's hypotheticals, but still, it's moot, but still, I think the point has to be made that defense should have been a little more addressed early on, at least better value in my opinion. But it's the frustration we have, and I know especially you, Austin, it's not going to stop for this next pick either with, this is going to be a fun name to learn how to pronounce. I know I kind of got it before, but it's Chukwuma Okorafor, the 3rd round pick, the 92nd overall pick, the offensive tackle from Western Michigan. Woo! All right. What do you think about him, though?
As I was saying with my last pick, screw the Steelers' passive, we give up mentality, and screw this pick. Again, Chucks is not the problem. He has high upside being young and still mastering the game, but this is not a win-now pick. This is not a guy who's going to stop Leonard Fournette from running all over the Steelers or stop teams from throwing deep on them. This isn't even a pick that will be starting anytime soon or seeing much action with the Steelers' line being one of the best in the league. I said I loved having Munchak develop O-line. I even wanted the Steelers to get a tackle in this draft, but in the 7th round. I didn't want them to take one before the 2nd pick in the 5th round, to be honest with you. And that's it. It wasn't even a position of need. It wasn't like, oh, they need to grab one. I was like, yeah, that'd be nice if they grabbed one there. But again, they just continue to disappoint and take a guy they don't need in the 3rd. It was a horrible choice, thus earning an F from me. Again, no offense to Chucks. I don't have anything against him. It'll probably be great when he does get to start with some development, but this was a bad pick for what the Steelers needed. And Mike Munchak didn't have interest in him. He said he didn't even know he was going to be drafted. He said he didn't even know it was a possibility. So that really just pisses me off even further because the coach that I believe in didn't get a say in it, and this is his guy. And that pisses me off beyond anything. As for his playing time this year, he's getting none. I can't imagine it. And Gerald Hawkins is probably going to be the first guy off the bench if anything goes awry. And if it's not Hawkins, it might be Filer. If he stays, I don't know who's going to make the roster, if it's Filer or Hawkins. I'm leaning towards Hawkins, but regardless, I can't see this guy playing many snaps unless both tackles go down with injury, and that would be traumatic. But what do you think of this pick?
I think the Steelers are too enamored with their idea of the best player available thing. I know it's generally worked out and it does make sense, but they are open for criticism here in my mind. Yes, Okafor might have the highest upside of any guy the Steelers drafted, but again, I think it's another example where the Steelers could have traded down and still got him. The way the rest of the draft had gone, again, it was just an issue of the Steelers need help on defense, particularly in the middle, and I'm sure he's going to be fine and he's going to work out, but again, that John Bostic is probably going to be playing 90% of the snaps on defense right now. Is that really what you want? I mean, maybe, but I don't think so. I don't think that's good enough to win you a Super Bowl. And picks like this just further validate that possibility. So, I think he's going to be a great player with Mike Munchak's supervision, assuming he's here that whole time. But it's also a telling sign for either Hawkins, Villanueva, or Gilbert that they don't think they're going to be around much longer. That's also what it tells me. So, I don't know, maybe there's something else of concern that we haven't learned yet, but until I learn that, I'm going to grade based on what I know, and what I know is that the Steelers still have a gaping hole at inside linebacker that was not addressed even at this point in the draft, which was the last pick the Steelers had to really get anybody of consequence that could really make an impact in year one. So, for that, I give this grade a C-. All right, on to day 3 of the draft, Austin. Round 5, pick 148. The Steelers go back to the safety position. They nab Marcus Allen from Penn State, a local kid who was very happy to be sure. But what do you think about it? Should the Steelers have double-dipped at the safety position here?
I think it was a solid choice. I think only because they got J.J. Wilcox cut, but as for Marcus Allen, when he got drafted, he was crying tears of joy because he grew up in Pittsburgh. That was his hometown, and he grew up a Steelers fan, and I appreciate that. I like letting guys stay where they want to be. But it's not just that, though. He's a solid player. I personally think he plays best by the line of scrimmage, and that's great. But again, it's another player who's lackluster in coverage and isn't so great in deep coverage. The Steelers are just so stubborn and refuse to actually address their weaknesses. Their Steelers needed a guy who could stop the deep ball, and they didn't get it in the draft. I just question them. Still, though, like I said, Allen ensured J.J. Wilcox was off the roster, as Wilcox just got cut today. So that's a good thing as well. So for this pick, I give the Steelers a C+. I was very close to a B-, though. I was a little in between and wishy-washy. But as for his playing time, I can't really see him playing that much. It's hard to tell right now before minicamp and all the camps and stuff and training. But I feel like Burr would come off the bench before him, if anything, because he has more NFL experience. But again, we have to see. I can't really tell you right now how much playing time he's going to get. So what do you think of the Marcus Allen pick?
You know, he just seems like a solid Steelers kind of guy at the safety position. He's a physical player and a good run defender. I'm not sure if he has a future in this defense, but he was a team leader, and that's something that should also be noted. A lot of these guys were team leaders and good work ethic guys that has changed from when the Steelers were picking even a few years ago. So it's interesting to note that the Steelers are kind of changing directions as far as that goes. But as far as Allen, I think he's just going to be a special teams contributor in the near future, and I think he'll be good at it. He's pretty big for a safety. He has decent upside, but it's going to land him most likely in a situational football mold where he comes in as a versatile linebacker who can move on passing downs a little better than the bigger linebackers. He needs a lot of improvement in coverage if he wants to become a typical option at safety. He's kind of a run-stopping, strong safety kind of mold, which isn't bad, but again, that's not really going to fix the Steelers' problems right now. He's kind of a poor man's Morgan Burnett, if you want to think of it that way, who can't cover really. So maybe he can in the future, but right now he's just a special teams guy with the future as a run-stopping safety. So, again, the Steelers not really helping themselves on defense here, just bolstering the safety depth, which, again, should count for something, but this late in the draft you would have wanted to see, again, something at inside linebacker. It's kind of a theme. So I give this pick a C+. And now we're on to the 5th round. Steelers had no 4th round pick this year. They picked kind of a guy with a bunch of positions and really no positions. His name is Jalen Samuels. He played running back, fullback, tight end, H-back, slot receiver at North Carolina State. He kind of did it all. What did you think about him?
I can tell you I'm not very happy with this pick. It makes sense, but at this point, the Steelers should have waited to draft a running back until next year, as they still needed so much help on defense. Not only that, but if they were going to take a running back, they should have grabbed the guy that had potential to be a returner of some kind, as that's where the Steelers still needed help. It's hard for me to say Samuels is going to make the roster because he has no return ability, and Toussaint does. Maybe if the Steelers need a fullback, he would make it, but the Steelers already have a fullback that plays special teams in Nick. He isn't big enough to play tight end in the NFL, so the only position where he could have been useful is really out of the question. To me, Jalen Samuels offers a lot of nothing. He's versatile, but his versatility doesn't cover any of the needs the Steelers really have. And this position could have waited for next year. I can't see him contributing much with Lev Bell and James Conner here anyway. He does play special teams, but not on the special teams I would want. And like I said, I don't even see him on the roster right now, so I'll give this pick a D, only not an F because he has great hands and might be able to block better than James Conner. But other than that, I hated this pick. I thought it was awful because it's just all the positions he plays are not things that the Steelers need. Like tight end, he's too small once he gets to the NFL. Running back's going to get no time. Fullback, we have one. And the fullback plays special teams the same way he can. He makes tackles on special teams. I was not happy at all. I thought it was a wasted pick, and I thought the Steelers should have went linebacker with this pick. But what do you think? I think you were a little bit happier than I was.
I was, and I think it's because the Steelers are finally doing what I was wanting them to do for a while, and that's starting to assemble a running back by committee approach, and I'm all for it. Samuels looks to me like the third down back of the future, and even if he doesn't fit in as a running back this year, that's okay because he can play fullback and tight end, and he can play in the slot, and he might not be overly effective at any of those, but he showed big playability last year as a running back. He scored a touchdown on every 9 touches of the football. He didn't run a lot of complicated routes in the slot, but he has really good hands. He ran well outside the tackle box, and he could pass protect well enough. And a year in the Steelers system, if the Steelers could manage to stash him away on the practice squad, I think he would be a good pass protection option and perhaps the future third down back for the Steelers. Since he won't have to play right away for the running back spot either, maybe he does open it up and play somewhere else. He is undersized for a tight end, but he did play H-back. Maybe that gives him a shot at the number 3 tight end position because, again, those guys have not been anything special, and we're talking about Jake McGee or Xavier Grimble. So I think he's a guy that can he reminds me a little bit of Darren Sproles in a sense that he can do it all. He's obviously not nearly as good right now, but I think that he can bring a lot to an offense, and he doesn't need to do that in one way or another, and he also doesn't have to play right away, but I think he is the third down back of the future. I'm hoping anyways. So I'm excited about this pick. I think this is a pretty good pick for the Steelers. Again, the lack of help at inside linebacker is going to continue to frustrate me, so it's going to bring the grade down from an A to a B+, however. The Steelers did not have a 6th-round pick, so with their final selection at 246th overall, the Steelers broke a record for the first Alabama player taken in the draft since 1998. That was Deshae Townsend. They picked defensive tackle Joshua Frazier. And what do you think about Josh Frazier?
Well, Daniel McCullers needed competition, and here it is. While I'm sad the streak of no Alabama players drafted comes to an end here, I really think this pick has a lot of upside. Frazier didn't get a lot of playing time at Alabama, and that's not necessarily his fault. He had a first-round guy playing in front of him, and you don't exactly take that kind of guy off the field much, but what's great about Frazier is that he could end up being a steal. Maybe Frazier is pretty solid. It might have been a 3rd or 4th-round potential, but we just don't know because of his lack of playing time. He could be even better, and luckily Steelers had the inside scoop on him, and apparently they liked him. So I have high hopes. This season, I can't see him contributing much, but I do think he makes the roster of McCullers at the moment and plays as a solid backup. For this pick, I give the Steelers an A-. I really can't complain. It's a 7th-round pick that might make the roster right off the bat. So to me, that's a solid pick. What do you think about this pick?
There's not a lot to say about Frazier on the surface, and like you said, that's mostly because he didn't play a ton at Alabama because he was behind Deron Payne for most of his college career, who was drafted in the first round. But considering Carl Dunbar, who's the new defensive line coach, coached both of them, and the Steelers believe he was worth this pick, it leads me to believe that he has a good amount of untapped potential and that he was a pretty well-kept secret at Alabama. He doesn't seem to possess that great of a pass rush, but he became a solid run defender and will have a good chance to take Daniel McCullers' job as the backup nose tackle. Within a year or two, he could become an important part of the defensive line, and because of the potential he brings, I think this is a better pick now than I thought after the draft. I'm not going to give it an A because, he's not like a 4th or 5th round guy that fell, but I still think this is a good pick. So I'll give it a B. And that wraps it up as far as the draft picks go. So undrafted free agents, the Steelers picked up, I believe, 13 of them. I'll name them for you right now. The first was Quadri Henderson, the wide receiver from Pittsburgh that Austin really liked. And he was quite an electrifying kick returner. He will have a shot to make the team. Inside linebacker Matthew Thomas from Florida State. Trey Johnson, the cornerback from Villanova. Kendall Vickers, a defensive end from Tennessee. Greg Gilmore, a nose tackle from LSU. Pharaoh McKeever, a tight end from North Carolina State. Patrick Morris, a center out of TCU. Jarvion Franklin, a running back from Western Michigan. Parker Cothran, a defensive tackle from Penn State. Ikena Nwokeji, an offensive lineman from Elon. I'm not really sure how you pronounce that. We'll see. Linebacker Olasunkami Adani. Olasunkami Adani, I believe is how you say that. A linebacker from Toledo. Chris Schluger, an offensive lineman from UAB, and Jamar Summers, a cornerback from Connecticut. All right, you've heard the names. Some of them we're familiar with, some of them we aren't. Are there any of these guys that really headline anything for you? Any of these guys interesting to you?
Well, Quadri Henderson was my second favorite draft move for the Steelers in this draft, if that tells you anything, but behind James Washington. I believe he's going to make the team as a gadget player and returner, and I actually wanted the Steelers to draft him in the 7th, but they did better and got him as an undrafted free agent. It's the only thing the Steelers did that actually exceeded my expectations in this draft. So, also, they picked up Matthew Thomas, who probably has the next best chance to make the team as an undrafted free agent, but I'm not that excited about him. And then also, I thought Trey Johnson, the cornerback, was a little bit of an interesting option. I think if Cody Sensabaugh might not make the team, he possibly could as an undrafted free agent, but it's a long shot. But for the three that I think are most likely to make the team, it's Quadri Henderson out of Pittsburgh, Matthew Thomas out of Florida State, and Trey Johnson out of Villanova. And so take it away. What do you think of the undrafted free agents?
Yeah, you really covered it all. Matthew Thomas was a guy I looked at. He's an athletic player at inside linebacker, but he didn't really do a whole lot well that you'd want from an inside linebacker. Really, that makes him similar to L.J. Fort in that manner. But why not try to stash him on the practice squad if that's the case? Time will tell, but I don't really have super high hopes for any of these players outside of Henderson being a potential return man. So we will soon see just how good they are. So let's talk about the whole draft now. What do you give the Steelers' grade for the 2018 NFL Draft?
Well, all picks do not weigh the same. Earlier picks are obviously more important. So all around, I give this draft a D+. You might be saying to yourself, you only had 2 guys have grades under a D+. What gives? Well, I'm also taking into consideration the Steelers completely avoided linebacker, the most important position for them going into the draft. No matter how you want to spin it, it was the most important position. And that's unforgivably bad. That coupled with a few bad-to-bad picks in the draft led me to give them a D+. I wasn't happy with this draft. This is one of the worst Steelers drafts I've seen in quite a while, to be honest with you. They are, if we didn't go over it now, in our next section, I probably would have given them the worst draft of all the teams, or up there with some of the worst drafts of teams. So what grade do you give them?
I give the Steelers a C for this draft. They ended up with some interesting players. They addressed the safety position a couple times. I like that. They made a reach for their first-round pick. They got an interesting quarterback in Mason Rudolph. They got a good receiver in James Washington. Okafor looks like a great offensive lineman in the making potentially, but he was picked too early with other needs on the board. The Steelers, again, did not address inside linebacker. They didn't address edge rusher. I don't know. That just doesn't have the makings of a great draft, and I was really hating the draft at first, then I kind of tried to make it look better than I thought it was, and over the past day or two, it's kind of come back down to me that I don't really like this draft class much. I think the players will be good, but it doesn't help the Steelers too much right now. So for that being the case, I'm going to give the Steelers a C for this draft grade. It could have been a lot better had they managed to take even one inside linebacker, but still, this was just very frustrating. And on the draft days, particularly the first and second, I was just really frustrated. So speaking of the Steelers' lackluster draft, let's talk about the rest of the draft. So I guess we'll just talk about who won and who lost the draft. Let's start with the winners of the draft this year. Who won the NFL draft as far as teams go?
I think the Chargers actually had the best draft. I think they got a steal in Derwin James and managed to address all the positions of need besides offensive tackle. But they still got an offensive lineman in the draft. They got a center. And I really like their draft. But after them, I think the Giants made out pretty well, too, getting Saquon Barkley in the first and getting Will Hernandez in the second to help block for. I also like the quarterback they took, Kyle Loletta. We didn't look over him in our quarterback preview, but he's out of Richmond, and I actually liked what he had to offer. So he's a good third-string guy for now behind the Davis Webb out of Cal and Eli Manning. So that's who I thought won. Who do you think won?
I believe that the Green Bay Packers were a huge winner. They improved a really bad defense through this draft. Their first 3 picks were on the defensive side of the football, and their first 2 were first-round talents. Both of them were cornerbacks. So you throw them into the starting defense right away, and their second-round pick, Burks, is athletic too as a linebacker. You add into the fold that they added a first-round pick through trades, and the Packers improved considerably while getting more picks for the future. That's a huge win. The Bears were the other team for me. They got my favorite linebacker in the draft in Roquan Smith, and they added a stud center in James Daniel with the potential star receiver in Anthony Miller, who has a great work ethic. And all of a sudden, the Bears are collecting a nice offense around last year's second pick, Mitchell Trubisky, and their defense got better in the process too. And they're not a playoff team yet, but they're a lot closer now than they were a year ago. All right, on the flip side, who are the big losers from this draft besides, if you want to say the Steelers, besides them?
Well, a year ago, after our pre-draft analysis, I had this team being one of the worst. And again, they make it to be one of the worst, the Seahawks. They didn't address their offensive line until round 5 and really reached on a running back in round 1 with Penny. When they could have had several great guys, it's just really baffling how the Seahawks just hate Russell Wilson and hate their running back group, that they want them to struggle behind a really poor offensive line. I wouldn't have even called them bad if they got Josh Jackson in the first, because they also needed a cornerback. But they just decided to just say, screw it, let's add to our running back room of average running backs with a running back that was projected to go to the third round. To be fair to them, though, they said that this can't be confirmed because they also didn't reveal the team, and that makes me question it. But they said, as soon as we drafted Rashad Penny, someone called about him to trade for him. I don't know if I believe that. I really don't, because they didn't reveal the team, and it's just, I think they were taking serious backlash for that pick. I think all of Seattle was mad about it, so there's that. But so the other team, I'm going to give it to the Raiders. Other than Maurice Hurst, their draft was horrible in my opinion. I think they reached on Colt Miller in the first, and I didn't like them getting another offensive tackle in the third. They also ended up giving a third-round pick for Martavis Bryant, so for a 1-year rental. So pretty bad in my opinion for them. So who do you think lost in this draft?
My losers were first and foremost the Saints. Look, they're like the Steelers. They're in win-now mode. They traded up in the first round. I like that. That's a good move. But who do they get? Oh, they got Marcus Davenport. Oh, that's interesting. He's a really raw defensive end prospect. Is he really going to put that defense over the top this year? Probably not. And furthermore, the Saints gave up a first-rounder next year for him, too. They got a couple of interesting options in the middle rounds like Traquan Smith, but the rest of their guys probably aren't going to be big impact guys like their draft class from last year was. I don't know. Maybe Davenport's a lot further along than NFL scouts seem to think, but it's kind of puzzling. Next, I have the Texans, and they got a great steal by managing to get Justin Reed with their third-round pick. The bad news is that was their first pick due to trades, and they were desperately needing offensive line help, and they didn't really help it at all. Deshaun Watson's going to be running around for his life again, and this time on a surgically repaired knee. I hope he's going to be okay because it's likely going to be a long year in Houston. So, I just mentioned Justin Reed. He's one player that fell quite a bit, so I'm actually going to come out and tell you I think he was the best value pick of the draft. He slid all the way to the third round. I thought he was the third best safety in this draft. I was really hoping the Steelers were going to use their first-round pick on him, and the Texans managed to get him in the third round, so that's a huge steal in my mind. Who else fell maybe that you thought was the best value pick?
I got to give it to Maurice Hurst in the fifth. If he's cleared medically, the Raiders actually got an absolute steal there. I mocked him to the Falcons in round one. I feel silly for that now, but he had so many good stats in college, so many good plays, so many good highlights. So if he gets medically cleared, he's going to be a wrecking ball for the Raiders. And they basically got another first-round pick in the fifth round. So that's who I think was the best value pick in the draft.
Alrighty, Austin. Let's talk about the rest of the Steelers offseason. The Steelers rookie camp is the next thing that's going to happen. Minicamp begins for the Steelers rookies between May 11th through the 13th. That includes all Steelers draft picks, undrafted free agents, and other rookie tryouts that the Steelers invite. It'll be a good chance for the Steelers to get some organized teamwork for the first time. Good to get the young players in with some work. As far as the rest of the offseason goes, tomorrow is the first day of the month, and in that month is the first OTAs. We have OTAs May 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. That's the first session. Second session is the 29th, 30th, and 31st. The third session is June 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. And then organized mini camps are June 12th, 13th, and 14th. To my knowledge, those are the only OTAs and mini camps the Steelers have until training camp at the end of July. So this is now officially the slowest time of the NFL season, if I'm not mistaken, Austin, right? Yeah, it is. There will not be too much to talk about. So I guess the next thing we'll do some sort of schedule analysis, but for the time being, we won't have much to talk about unless if something breaks with Steelers news. So we wanted to thank all of our listeners for joining us throughout the draft process, and even though you might not have enjoyed it like we didn't enjoy it, and we obviously the draft frustrated us, but maybe some good will come of it. And we're one step closer to football being played. We're halfway through the offseason, but again, for the next couple months, you won't see too much from us. So we'll obviously keep everyone in our thoughts, and we'll be excited to get back to chomping at the bit with the offseason coming to a close with the start of training camp. But for now, it is, I guess, the dead time, and it will let us focus on wrapping up our school year with finals and whatnot, and I'll be able to graduate soon. Is there anything else you wanted to say, Austin, before we kind of wrap things up for the draft process and as we get into kind of the slow time of our year?
No, I think we're good for today.
Yeah, not a whole lot else going on. I mean, I think the only other thing that there might be any updates is the Lev Bell situation. I guess any news that comes out now is probably not good news, not just on the Bell front, but anybody else really, right?
No, I don't think so.
Alrighty, so hope for a quiet spring and beginning of your summer. Focus on other sports if you have to. We will definitely reconvene if there's something else going on, but we just told you the mini camp schedules. So until then, Austin, we'll wrap this up for today. Thank you so much for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. We will have our various social media websites and our own website, strongerthansteelnfl.blogspot.com, listed in the description below. Feel free to click on those, give us a follow. And if you have any questions about the show, email us at strongerthansteelpodcast. Austin, thank you so much for joining me today. I don't know when our next episode will be, but I have a feeling that I'll be done with college at that point. So I'm definitely looking forward to it, and it's going to be a little while because tomorrow's the first. We got to do something soon. I don't know how long I can really go without talking football.
Yeah, man, we got to cover something. There's got to be something to talk about.
We'll figure something out. Something is bound to happen. But until then, thank you, as always, for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. Have a good night.
Night.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.